The salt-heavy wind off the California coast dragged a stray piece of spreadsheet paper across my wooden porch, pinning it against the railing. I didn't reach for it. My coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, the dark surface reflecting the muted grey of a marine layer that refused to burn off. At 34, I spent my days as a forensic accountant, dismantling corporate fraud and tracing hidden assets until my eyes blurred and my faith in human decency wore paper thin. I wanted peace. I wanted silence. And right then, the frantic slamming of a car door in the driveway next door shattered both. She took the porch stairs 2 at a time, a whirlwind of canvas tote bags, loose papers, and desperate energy. Sadie Jenkins, my neighbour's daughter. I usually only saw her watering her mother's succulents on weekends, a quiet researcher who kept to herself. Today, her knuckles were white as she clutched a red legal folder to her chest, her breathing shallow and uneven. She stopped at the edge of my porch, blocking the ocean breeze. "Jackson," she said, her voice tight, skipping the pleasantries entirely. "I have a problem. A really massive, life-ruining problem. And my mother said you fix things with numbers." I set my ceramic mug on the side table, the dull clink grounding the sudden chaos she brought into my space. "I untangle audits, Sadie. I don't fix lives." She stepped closer, the exhaustion in her posture suddenly obvious. "Would you be my fake husband by Friday?" she asked, the words tumbling out in one panicked rush. I looked at her, really looked at her. Her shoulders were rigid, defensive, like she expected me to laugh or shut the door in her face. I rubbed the back of my neck, the familiar weight of someone else's crisis settling over me. "Does a fake husband make you coffee in the morning?" I asked, keeping my voice low, deliberate, trying to lower the temperature of the conversation. She blinked, the frantic rhythm of her panic momentarily derailed by the question. A shaky exhale escaped her. Yes, maybe. I just need someone to sign this trust document." "Sit down," I told her, gesturing to the wicker chair opposite mine. She collapsed into the chair, dropping the red folder onto the small table between us. The papers spilled out. I didn't touch them yet. I waited for her to steady her breathing. "The Horizon Grant," she started, her fingers twisting the strap of her tote bag. "It funds my entire botanical research lab. I've spent 4 years developing a drought-resistant crop strain. But the board director, Dr. Aris, just hit me with a compliance notice. My original funding contract had a stability clause buried in it. Because I used a private family trust to secure the initial lease, the clause dictates that by my 29th birthday, which is this Friday, the trust must be managed by a stabilized dual-party entity. A spouse. I frowned, the professional part of my brain waking up, sharpening. That's not standard compliance. That's a trap. "It's a debt trigger," Sadie said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "If I default on the condition by 5 p.m. Friday, the grant converts into an immediate personal loan. $600,000, due in 30 days. When I inevitably bankrupt, the board seizes my patents." I reached for the papers. I didn't offer empty reassurances or tell her everything would be fine. I let the silence stretch as I flipped through the heavy stock paper, scanning the dense legalese. My eyes caught the exact paragraph. Section 4, Subclause B. It was elegantly vicious. Doctor. Aris had engineered a legal snare designed to force her out. "He's banking on you panicking," I said, my voice flat, factual. "He expects you to surrender the patents in exchange for debt forgiveness." "I can't lose my work, Jackson," she said, leaning forward. "My mother suggested you because you know contracts. If we register a civil marriage and file the dual trust paperwork by Friday morning, it neutralizes his leverage. It's a business transaction. I'll annul it the second my patents are legally separated from the grant." I looked at her hands. They were trembling slightly. I wanted to tell her to find a lawyer, to walk away, to leave my quiet porch alone. But looking at the sheer predatory greed printed on the page in front of me made my chest tight. I hated bullies who used paperwork as a weapon. "I'll need full access to your lab's financial ledgers," I said, my tone shifting into the cadence of my work. "If we're doing this, we do it flawlessly. No gaps." Her shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, the first sign of relief. "You'll do it?" "I'll look at the ledgers," I corrected gently. "And we start the paperwork tomorrow." I paused, then added, "And I prefer my coffee black." By Tuesday morning, my dining room table had disappeared under a sea of Sadie's research documents, bank statements, and grant policies. The California sun tried to warm the room, but the atmosphere was purely clinical. Sadie sat across from me, a pencil tucked behind her ear, highlighting clauses in a secondary policy manual. We were navigating the bureaucracy of the marriage license. It was a sterile, logistical nightmare that required appointments, identity proofs, and joint financial declarations to satisfy Dr. Aris's specific requirements. "This form requires a shared residential address," Sadie pointed out, sliding a blue sheet of paper toward me. "I can forward my mail here. It's only next door." "Done," I said, signing my name on the bottom line without looking up from my laptop. I was tracing the Horizon Grant's payout structure. Something didn't sit right. A forensic accountant doesn't just look at what's there. We look at the negative space, the money that isn't moving. I paused my typing and looked at her. She had a smudge of graphite on her cheek. She looked exhausted, running on adrenaline and fear. I closed my laptop halfway. "You haven't eaten since yesterday." Sadie looked up, defensive. "I don't have time to be hungry, Jackson. The courthouse closes at 4. I didn't argue. I stood up, went to the kitchen, and pulled 2 bottles of water and a pre-packaged sandwich from the fridge. I set them down on the table near her elbow. "Eat half of it. Then we go to the courthouse." She stared at the sandwich, then at me. "You don't have to manage me." "I'm not managing you," I said calmly, returning to my seat. "I'm maintaining my business partner's stamina. A low blood sugar crash in the middle of a county clerk's office won't help us." She let out a short, tired laugh, picking up the water. "Point taken." The courthouse was loud, crowded, and smelled of floor wax and stale perfume. We stood in line for 45 minutes. A couple in front of us was arguing about catering. A couple behind us was holding hands so tightly their knuckles were pale. Sadie and I stood side by side, a respectable foot of distance between us. When we finally reached the clerk, a severe woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, the process was brutally unromantic. We handed over our IDs, paid the fee, and swore we weren't related. "Sign here," the clerk barked, pushing a heavy ledger toward us. Sadie picked up the pen. Her hand hesitated for a fraction of a second. I didn't pressure her. I just stood there, a steady presence, letting her control the pace. She signed her name, sharp and quick, then handed the pen to me. I signed. It felt heavy, a legal tethering, even if temporary. When we walked back out into the bright afternoon sun, the silence between us shifted. It wasn't awkward, but it was weighted. "We need to draft the trust amendment tonight," I said, keeping the conversation strictly on the method. "I'll handle the asset routing. You just need to verify the patent identification numbers." "Jackson," she said, stopping on the sidewalk. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "Thank you. I know this is a massive intrusion on your life." I put my hands in my pockets. "I don't mind the work, Sadie. Let's just get it done." Wednesday was a blur of high-level policy mastery. I spent 12 hours cross-referencing Dr. Aris's compliance notice against the state's trust and estate laws. Sadie worked beside me, compiling her lab data. We had fallen into a quiet rhythm. I made the coffee, she organized the files. We didn't talk about our pasts, our wounds, or the strange reality of what we had just done at the courthouse. We were shieldmates in a foxhole, entirely focused on the incoming fire. I found the anomaly at 11 p.m. "Look at this," I said, tapping my screen. Sadie moved around the table, standing close behind my chair to look at the monitor. I could smell a faint trace of lavender soap. I kept my focus rigidly on the numbers. "Doctor, Aris sits on the board of Horizon, but he also has a controlling interest in BioAgri Solutions," I explained, tracing the data line with my cursor. "BioAgri is the exact company that would benefit most from your drought-resistant strain. If you default, Horizon seizes the patents, but Horizon's bylaws allow them to auction seized assets to board-affiliated entities at a fractional cost." Sadie's breath hitched. "He's not just enforcing a rule. He's actively stealing my work to sell it to his own company." "It's a conflict of interest," I stated, the anger cold and precise in my chest. "It invalidates his position on the compliance committee." "Can we prove it by Friday?" she asked, her voice tight with renewed panic. "I already downloaded the SEC filings," I told her, clicking open a new folder. "We have the proof. We just need to formulate the trap." Thursday morning brought the twist we didn't anticipate. I was on the porch, nursing a black coffee, when Sadie burst out of her front door. She wasn't carrying files this time. She was holding her phone, her face completely drained of color. "He froze the account," she said, her voice shaking. I set my mug down instantly. "The deadline is Friday at 5 p.m. "He initiated an early administrative hold pending the compliance review," she said, stepping onto my porch. "My lab manager just called. The vendor for our climate control units tried to run the monthly draft, and it bounced. If the units shut down, 4 years of cultivated samples die by tomorrow." The sheer aggression of the move was staggering. Dr. Aris wasn't waiting for the legal default. He was creating a physical crisis to break her resolve. "How much to keep the units running?" I asked, already pulling my phone from my pocket. $2,000, she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "But the vendor won't take a personal credit card for a commercial account in default. They require a wire transfer from a verified trust." I opened my banking app. "Give me the vendor's routing information." Sadie shook her head, stepping back. "No, Jackson, absolutely not. You are not paying for this. You've already done too much. Sadie, I said, my voice dropping to that calm, authoritative tone I used in boardrooms when the shouting started. The asset is at risk. I am a co-signer on the newly formed trust. I have legal standing to inject capital to stabilize the entity. It's not a gift. It's a tactical maneuver to keep your leverage alive. She looked at me, the stubborn independence fighting against the desperate reality of her dying lab. Let me handle the logistics, I said softly. You keep your focus on the research. Give me the routing number. She dictated the numbers, her voice barely above a whisper. I initiated the wire transfer. It cleared 3 minutes later. They're paid, I confirmed, showing her the screen. The samples are safe. Sadie didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She just sank onto the top step of my porch, pulling her knees to her chest. The fight seemed to temporarily leave her. I sat down beside her, maintaining a respectful distance, the wooden planks hard and cold beneath us. I hate this, she whispered. I hate that he can just press a button and erase everything I've built. I feel completely powerless. I looked out at the ocean. You aren't powerless, Sadie. You built something so valuable that a millionaire is breaking federal law to try and steal it from you. That is power. He's just trying to make you forget it. She rested her chin on her knees, staring at the driveway. Why do you do this? Fix other people's messes? I considered the question. I rarely talked about my own void. Because I like order, I said simply. The world is loud and chaotic and unfair. Numbers make sense. Contracts make sense. When I can force a system to behave fairly, it makes the noise in my head quiet down for a little while. She turned her head to look at me. Is the noise quiet now? I met her gaze. The tension between us wasn't frantic or chaotic. It was steady, like a dropped anchor. Yeah, I said, honestly. It's quiet. We sat in silence for a long time, the shared stillness acting as a shield against the incoming storm of Friday morning. Friday arrived with the oppressive clarity of an execution day. The Horizon Grant Board met in a sleek glass-walled conference room in downtown San Diego. We arrived 10 minutes early. I wore a charcoal suit. Sadie wore a sharp navy blazer. We didn't look like newlyweds. We looked like a legal strike team. Dr. Aris was a man who wore his arrogance like expensive cologne. He sat at the head of the long table, flanked by 3 other silent board members. He smiled when Sadie walked in, a thin, predatory expression. Miss Jenkins, he said smoothly, I see you brought counsel. He's not my lawyer, Sadie said, taking a seat directly across from him. She didn't wait for permission. She placed her red folder on the glass table. He's my husband, and the co-director of the Jenkins Heart Stabilized Trust. The silence in the room was absolute. Dr. Aris's smile vanished, replaced by a tight, calculating frown. He looked at me, dismissing me instantly as a threat. A marriage of convenience, Aris scoffed, leaning back in his leather chair. A transparent attempt to circumvent the compliance clause. The board will need to review the validity of this union, which will take 30 days. In the meantime, the default stands. The board won't be reviewing anything, Sadie said, her voice clear and unwavering. She didn't look at me for support. She held her own ground. She opened her folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. That is the filed and certified trust amendment, satisfying Section 4, Subclause B in its entirety. Aris barely glanced at it. I am initiating the asset seizure protocol regardless. The unapproved vendor payment yesterday violated our operational guidelines. Dr. Aris, I interrupted. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room with heavy, absolute authority. He glared at me. Excuse me? I didn't raise my voice. I opened my slim leather portfolio and extracted a stapled document. I didn't slide it to him. I placed it in the center of the table. That is a forensic audit of the BioAgri Solutions purchasing history over the last 36 months, I stated, leaning my forearms on the table. Specifically, the fractional cost acquisitions of defaulted patents from this very board. A board you direct. Aris stiffened. The other 3 board members suddenly sat up straighter, looking at the document like it was a live grenade. You are in direct violation of SEC Conflict of Interest statutes, breach of fiduciary duty, and attempted corporate extortion, I continued, stating the facts with lethal precision. If you attempt to default Ms. Jenkins's grant today, I will file this audit with the California Attorney General's office at 5:01 p.m. I will also forward it to the remaining Horizon investors, outlining how you have been using their capital to incubate research only to steal it for your private portfolio. Aris opened his mouth, his face flushing a dark, angry red. This is blackmail. It's compliance, I corrected dryly. I'm just enforcing the rules. Sadie didn't gloat. She didn't make a speech. She looked directly at Dr. Aris and delivered the final practical blow. I want a signed release of the stability clause, removing the board's ability to trigger a default based on marital status. I want it signed right now. If you sign it, I keep my lab, and you get to keep your job. Aris looked at the audit report, then at the other board members who were actively distancing themselves from him. He had no leverage left. The trap was neutralized. He snatched a pen from his pocket, signed the release form Sadie had provided, and shoved it back across the table. Sadie picked it up, verified the signature, and closed her folder. She stood up. Thank you for your time. We walked out of the glass room, down the hallway, and into the elevator. The doors slid shut. The silence descended again, but this time it was the silence of victory. Sadie let out a long, shaky breath, leaning back against the elevator wall. She looked at me, a genuine, unguarded smile breaking across her face. You completely dismantled him. You set the terms, I pointed out, giving credit where it was due. You negotiated your own deal. I just provided the math. We, she corrected softly. We did it. The aftermath of a crisis always leaves a strange vacuum. By Friday evening, we were back on my porch. The marine layer had finally burned off, leaving a clear, dark sky filled with stars. The threat was gone. The fake marriage had served its purpose. Logically, we should be discussing the annulment paperwork, but neither of us was moving to get the laptop. I was sitting in my wicker chair, a glass of water in my hand. Sadie was sitting on the steps, much like she had on Thursday, but the tension was gone from her shoulders. I'll draft the dissolution forms on Monday, I said quietly, addressing the elephant on the porch. It should be a clean filing. Sadie didn't answer immediately. She picked at a splinter on the wooden step. Does it have to be Monday? I stopped. I looked at her back. We only had an agreement until Friday. She turned around to face me. The board threat is gone. I have my lab. I have my patents. I don't need a fake husband anymore, Jackson. She stood up, walking over to the small table between us. She looked down at me, her expression clear, decisive, and entirely unpanicked. But I think I'd like to keep the real one around for a while. If you want to. It was a concrete choice. No flowery declarations, no dramatic speeches. Just a practical, honest request to stay. I set my glass down. I didn't reach for her desperately. I stood up, maintaining my steady pace. I looked at her, seeing the resilience, the sharp intellect, and the quiet warmth she brought to my rigidly ordered life. I don't like chaos, Sadie, I said, my voice low. I know, she replied. I'll keep the paperwork organized. I stepped closer. The distance between us closed, not in a rush, but with the heavy, grounding feeling of arriving at a destination. I reached out and took her hand. It wasn't a spark, it was a transfer of stability. I felt the last of my weariness drain away, replaced by a quiet, absolute certainty. I leaned down and kissed her. It was brief, soft, and final. A seal on a new contract, one we were both choosing to sign. I'll make the coffee tomorrow, I told her against her forehead. She squeezed my hand. Black, I know. I learned that true integrity isn't just about following the rules. It's about knowing when to use them to protect the people who matter. Real love isn't chaotic drama. It's consistency, safety, and showing up when the deadline is tight. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.